If you've spent hours pouring through paragraph after paragraph, desperately trying to learn MCAT metabolism, but finding that your mind goes blank every time you get to a question on the Krebs cycle, trust me, I know that frustrating feeling. And it's not a personal shortcoming, you're just studying metabolism in a completely incorrect way. In today's video, I'm going to show you the exact prompt and workflow that I used on ChatGPT to learn and understand all of MCAT metabolism in just 10 to 15 minutes a day. So the learning style I used to make metabolism approachable was a method I like to call metabolism of the day. And what that involves is picking one specific pathway each day before starting my dedicated study blocks. And if you want the exact prompt that I used to copy and paste for convenience purposes, it's pinned in the comments section below. But I like this style of learning for many, many reasons. The first one being that it distills the overall purpose into one sentence. So it says here glycolysis is the pathway that converts glucose into pyruvate to generate ATP and NADH. So now instead of trying to piece together or memorize 10 individual steps, you're approaching glycolysis as one concerted mechanism. At the end of each step, you're asking one question. How does it contribute to the goal of producing pyruvate, ATP, and NADH? And what that does is it makes the information a lot more digestible because now you're not trying to randomly memorize 10 steps. You're asking a specific question. How is the overall goal achieved? And perhaps my favorite thing about this prompt is that it really emphasizes the high yield information that MCAT loves to test. Because the MCAT doesn't care that you learned every single step of every single pathway. They want you to know the high yield information and why, the reasoning behind it. And you scroll down and you see convenient visuals that help you keep the information separate, that help you further understand and that reiterate the high yield material. And one of my favorite things was its ability to consistently draw in clinical and MCAT connections. Because now you're not just memorizing facts or reading paragraphs, you're learning how to actively apply the information you're learning. So that when you get to that question on test day about the Krebs cycle or beta oxidation or glycolysis, you know how to actively apply the information that you spent so many hours learning. And while we're on the topic of application, this prompt is excellent in explaining concepts like hormonal control. And what that does is it creates essentially a one-stop shop for everything you need to know about each pathway. You don't learn about glycolysis in one chapter and then wait 2 to 3 chapters to learn about insulin and glucagon and how they impact glycolysis after you've forgotten every detail. You learn it all together and you weave together different concepts. And what I really enjoy is that it goes into detail explaining how. So for instance, instead of just saying that insulin increases glycolytic flux, it gives you a scenario and tells you the mechanism by which this is achieved. And this is especially important because although you might be able to memorize for glycolysis that insulin increases glycolytic flux, you have about 10 different pathways to memorize. So to keep all of that information separate, it's just a nightmare. It's much easier to take a little bit of extra time to learn it all together to understand how insulin would impact glycolytic flux. And as you continue to scroll down towards the bottom, you're going to find that you get a nice little high yield summary. So this is a nice, concise way to, once again, familiarize yourself with the high yield information and see it all over again to make sure that it really sticks. And here's an underrated part that I really loved. The MCAT loves to be tricky. They love to test exceptions, but with this prompt, you can ensure that you have all your bases covered because they go over the most common exceptions that trip a lot of students up. Finally, you get the MCAT application questions. Not only is this a good chance to practice applying the information you learn, you also get a sense of how the MCAT could present metabolism questions And you also get the ability to determine if you're struggling with a step or struggling with a specific enzyme. These questions could act as a guide to show you your weaknesses or show you what you struggle to understand or memorize. And although this entry that ChatGPT gives you is an amazing way to learn metabolism, you have to be able to understand and retain 10 different pathways. So in the second half of the video, I'm actually going to show you my exact specific workflow that I used to get all of this information down and locked away in my brain so I didn't forget it. Because at the end of the day, it's a lot of information. It's about 10 different pathways and you have to keep them all separate. So learning it is arguably not the hardest part. It's retaining it that students struggle with. So the specific retention pathway I used was whiteboard, Anki, and back to the whiteboard. And what that means is after I was done with ChatGPT, after I spent the 10-15 minutes learning the pathway, I would attempt to draw out the entire pathway, all the key enzymes, completely from scratch. And a lot of times, yes, I would miss some key enzymes or miss some key steps, but all that will require is me going back to ChatGPT and brushing up on the steps that I was unfamiliar with. So let's say, for instance, I'm trying to draw out glycolysis, and I'm drawing out step 1, glucose turning into glucose 6-phosphate. Easy enough. But let's say I forgot the key enzyme catalyzing the step. All that would entail is me going back to ChatGPT and really reading up on that step. And if it was particularly a high yield step like this one is, I would really emphasize a conceptual understanding of the part I missed. So here I missed the enzyme hexo or glucokinase. So I would really read about their function to try and make it stick. And after I was done sketching out the entire pathway, what I would do is I would go to Anki and use the Miles Down deck. I really liked this deck because it was thorough but also concise at the same time. And I would suspend all the cards related to the specific pathway I just studied and get through all of them. And then later that night before I went to sleep, I would do the same thing, try to sketch out the entire pathway again. And what I found that was most nights I was able to do this with almost 100% accuracy. More often than not, by this point, I had a very good grasp and handle on the entire pathway that I studied. And yes, while this was proof that I had a good, solid understanding of that pathway for that day, it doesn't necessarily mean that it was locked in my head forever, or at least until test day. And if you're particularly proactive about your MCAT studying, maybe you know about Ebbinghaus's forgetting curve from the psychology section, and what it states is that there are rapid declines in memory over the next coming days. So how did I keep this locked in my mind, especially while I was learning about new pathways like beta oxidation, the pyruvate dehydrogenase complex, the Krebs cycle? So what I did was, number 1, I made sure to keep up with all the Anki cards over the next coming few days and weeks. But number 2 is I would randomly pick a pathway out of all the ones that I mastered and go back to the whiteboard, redraw the entire pathway from scratch. And what I found was that within 3 weeks, I didn't need to do this system anymore. Just enough work with keeping up with my Anki cards and staying with the practice questions that were part of my schedule was enough to directly maintain all the knowledge required for all of the pathways until test day. So hopefully this method of learning and retention makes the boatload of information that is metabolism so much more manageable. And before you go, I have an important announcement. I'm going to be starting a free weekly newsletter. It's going to consist of MCAT advice, practice passages and problems, CARS strategies, test-taking strategy, and information-packed PDFs. Like for instance, this week's PDF is going to contain everything you need to know about metabolism in a high-yield, digestible, information-packed format. So if you want to take your studying to the next level, be sure to sign up for my free weekly newsletter. See you guys in the next video.